Okay, perfect. Great. What's the easiest thing? Do you want me to grab it, or do you want me to
Yeah, here you go.
Can we hand off a little bit, I guess?
Absolutely, yeah, you can.
The easiest thing to do? Okay, great. All right, so to step back and give you a full view of the entire thing, basically, as you walk in the room, this is what you're going to see. There is over on the far right-hand side, the computer desk. And this is where you can see on the right-hand side, the offline computer that I mentioned for doing data processing and analysis. You also have the system computer, which is the one with the monitor showing up. And that's where we're going to collect all of our images. There are a couple of different hardware controllers that you can see right beside the computer as well. But really, the business end of this entire thing is right here. And you can see the anti-vibration table supporting the inverted microscope, the Observer 7. You can see the incubation box around it as well. And then we're going to talk about the different hardware on this in more detail. There is a joystick on the right-hand side to control the stage motion. And you see basically a laser cart on the right-hand side of this. So the cart itself is really just this portion right here and down. We also have stacked on it a bunch of different incubation components that you can see right here. So we have the temperature, the CO2 control. There is a wide field lamp right here, the SOLA. So this is what you're going to use for camera, like wide field fluorescence imaging, and also to view samples by eye. And there's a humidifier bottle here that's heated, basically that's feeding into the incubation as well. You have a number of different control boxes right here. They are all turned on automatically, which is the reason why they have yellow tape over everything. But basically, very quickly, controller for the Z piezo, controller for the stage, controller for the microscope itself, and controller for the definite focus as well. At the very top, you have another one of the incubation components. This is the heater box connected to the rest of these that basically through the dryer hose is going to heat the entire black box incubation chamber that you see around the microscope as well. Okay. At the very back of the system, just to show you what those two scan heads were that I gave you phantom views of in the PowerPoint presentation, you can see the traditional confocal scan head right here. So this is where we had that spectral imaging and regular confocal imaging in terms of detection. And then you have this other little shoebox that's kind of connected on the side. This is the AreaScan 2. So this is where we're going to be able to do super resolution and faster multiplex imaging as well. All right. On the right-hand side of the stage, you have a number of different stage inserts. This is a beautiful, I love this, by the way, a beautiful little rack to be able to stack these easily and tightly. We're going to talk about this in a second because it's a bit of a mess. And then you can see basically in terms of the microscope itself, you have, again, basically a standard inverted microscope right here. You can see on the left-hand side, the Axiom Cam 305. So this is our monochrome camera for sample navigator and for just doing quick wide field navigation. You also have for bright field a halogen lamp on top. You have the TPMT here as well. So this is for working with laser scanning. And basically what it does is it picks off any laser that you're using for confocal and allows you to see at the same time as you're doing your confocal imaging, a bright field style image here as well. The system does come with DIC components as well, so that's an option, and you can use that in conjunction with this to get an even better image quality. We tend not to put the DIC sliders on underneath the objective because they do interfere with AreaScan and the super resolution. In as much as super resolution lets you see how they split light, which is kind of cool, and I'm happy to show off light, but it's a bit of a tangent. Anyway, the incubation that you see as well is this entire enclosure here. So you can see that there are a lot of different sliding doors to be able to keep everything light, tight, and contained. There is a little sneeze guard here in case you want it. but you can also tuck that out of the way so that you have basically complete access across the entire front. And then there are also sliding doors underneath and on the side as well. And if you ever need to, hopefully most people don't, you can also remove this entire bottom chamber if you need better access to put in different types of equipment and so forth. There are shelves in here as well. So there's a shelf kind of right there at the back that allows you to lay different incubation equipment on it. There's room for a bottle rack and things like that, and lots of different tubing access ports and stuff like that as well. Okay? So this is the XL enclosure. One thing that I'd like to point out is that at the moment, the top here is basically wide open. There is basically a cover that actually moves with this. So it's much improved over some of the incubation elements that we've had in the past where you have to slide doors and sometimes those get jammed or caught and everything else. So this is really meant basically to go on the system. These two different pieces at the side that I mentioned were a mess are supposed to be here. I'm going to put them on over lunch and we can maybe see those as we keep on working, but they're basically meant to move with the tower as you slide it back. And so they should really just kind of bolt in place. And you shouldn't need to worry about them. They should just move with the whole thing. So probably not going to be able to do it with one hand right now, but I'd like to at least maybe kind of tack this on so you can get a feel for it. Okay, I think that should be all right. So basically, this whole thing is meant to just push back. So when you're trying to get better access to the microscope stage, you generally want to tilt back the tower. So you're going to grab it by the solid piece at the front, and you can push that back so that everything moves. And this top portion, the light tight cap of the incubation should really just move with everything. All right. You can see here as well, we have basically on the, let's finish off with the incubation, I guess, first. So on the right-hand side here, in addition to this entire box, which is only heat controlled, only temperature controlled, we do also have incubation stage inserts that are sitting inside here. So you can see that there's this white lid. This basically has tubing that supplies the humid CO2 to the sample as well. And so we can kind of tilt that back a little bit. If people have certainly been using this, that's great. And you can see that we basically have a stage insert that is specific for Petri dishes and also for microscope slides or chamber slides as well. So I think maybe when I hand off the phone to Cassandra, I'll pull this out and I'll show this in a bit more detail. You also have on the right-hand side another one of these inserts, which is basically this insert KM. And this is meant to work in conjunction with the lid, specifically for multi-wall trays. And so this isn't heated, but through heating the entire chamber and through the heated air coming in from the lid, it does a pretty nice job of controlling temperature as well. So if you need to do incubation with heated multi-wall plates, this is the way to go. And then the other insert that we have that I'm actually going to change out likely before we get started here is another insert that is designed for Petri dishes again or slides. And so this looks a lot like our classic stage insert. But the one thing that you'll notice is that it does have these little sliding rails that are that can be clamped down as well. And so the one point that I want to mention, and I'm probably going to say it 10 times today as we're working with this, is that because this stage insert bolts in place and these things can bolt down as well, you really want to make sure that when you're working with this and putting it onto the stage, that you don't have the objectives underneath any of this metal. Because if you accidentally focus too high, then on a good day, you only bend these supports so that you're never flat again. On a bad day, you break one of these beautiful objectives worth thousands of dollars. So and worth your imaging, your science. So please be careful with these. The older inserts, basically, if you focus too high, if you push too hard, they just kind of popped out with the spring clip. You don't have that luxury anymore. So just be very careful with this, please, please, please. I will keep on saying this throughout the day, like I said. So those are the different stage inserts that you have with the system. You can see the objectives here underneath as well. You can see that the condenser has a couple of different features. You have sort of at the back right here, there is this little LED array. This is part of the AI sample finder that we have to help with quick focus and navigation. And one of the objective ports is, if I can actually get in here and see it, one of the objective ports is actually a mirror as well. And so that actually works with a secret little camera that we have in the back here to help with that kind of overview image that I'm talking about. Okay. Let's see. In terms of the rest of the hardware, I don't know if we should really go over all of the focusing and the different manual controls and everything else. I guess for anyone who's new to a Zeiss system, what I'll say is that there's 3 different ways on any Zeiss microscope to control the system. There are a lot of controls here that are manual. I'll talk about a few of them quickly. So for people who still like to be very hands-on, you can do things this way. There are also the touchscreen controls. So for anybody who likes to do things electronically, you have this at your fingerprints, even with a focus knob and everything else. And then, of course, everything can be done through the software too. So everybody is going to have their favorite way of basically working with the system and navigating and everything else. Let's see. All right. So in terms of different controls on the system, you have basically the focus knobs on either side. So you can see those here. Coarse focus and fine focus. On the other side, you have coarse focus and then a plate, which serves as fine focus as well. And on any Zeiss microscope, basically, if you're focusing thumbs up, then the objective is going up. If you're focusing thumbs down, the objective is going down. So if you don't know which way to focus, start by focusing down. And if you find that things are getting dimmer or blurrier, then you're going the wrong way and you want to turn around. All right. And of course, start with the lower magnification to begin with. You also have a couple of different controls over here on the side that I like to use on a confocal microscope as well. So the top one is the shutter for the bright field or transmitted light. The bottom one is the shutter for the fluorescence or the reflected light. In this case, this shutter actually is inactive, I should mention, because we're using the SOLA. So you're actually going to shut that off using the software, in fact. But for bright field control, working with the shutter is really quite nice. There's a number of different buttons that wrap around the side of the focus knob as well. There's actually 5 of them, and what they do is listed on the side of the microscope. I wish I knew that years ago. To be perfectly honest, for the most part, I don't really work with these buttons that are on the side of the objective because, or of the focus knob, because they are easier to control in a knowledgeable way through the software and through the touchscreen. And the same thing goes on the right-hand side as well. We could change the reflectors. So these 2 are basically buttons in front. At the back of the microscope, we have basically these reflector controls. There's no point in really doing this here because you don't really know which one it's going to go to. It's easier to do through the software, basically. The other control that you might end up using here is the dial, which is going to adjust your bright field intensity. So for the halogen lamp that's on top, this is going to allow you to adjust that brightness. And again, you can do this through the software, which is often a lot easier. You have a joystick on the right-hand side of the air table here. And this controls your X and Y motion. And you'll notice that there's 4 different function keys right here. Only the F1 actually does anything. And if we toggle this, you'll see that the SMC 2009 has a little yellow light that goes, that lights up when we're moving slower than we would normally. So if you want to, if you're finding that your sample is moving too quickly, you can just hit this F1 button and you can toggle back and forth between that fast and slow configuration. Okay. think we're kind of running out. I don't think I'm going to do color illumination today. If we wanted to, I could, we can do it another time or just do a short web snap or something like that. But all of these controls for field diaphragm, condenser diaphragm, and all that, we'll talk about later. I should mention also that there's a light on here as well. So this little dial basically allows you to turn on and off the sort of vanity light inside the enclosure here, which allows you really to work with your sample in a dark space. So really quite handy to have that adjustment as well. Does anybody have any questions so far? Awesome. All right, good. So there is, for the solar light engine, I guess I'll mention that you do have a power switch here. You can see that there's also a light button as well at the top. And so you can control the solar here directly if you need to. But there's also software that you can use to control that as well. I think in terms of the touchscreen, we can go over that a little bit as well, I guess. For anyone who's new to Zeiss, again, we always have this little touchscreen available with the system typically. So you have a focus knob, which is handy because it's right here by the computer. So you don't have to keep on turning back and forth. The touchscreen usually opens up in the home position, which just gives you a status, shows you what everything is set to. And then you also have the ability to work with the microscope control. So there are other options that are here that are available, like settings and display and everything. I think I'm going to leave those to the advanced users because it'll be too much to really go over all of that. But the microscope controls I really like. These basically give you the ability to work with tabs across the top that will let you change your objectives, your reflector, your light path if you want to. So this can be a very handy way to basically switch between different objectives and also to switch between your different reflectors. So you have a polarizer for DIC, you have something for GFP, for DS red, and then for DAPI. The mirror basically sends everything to the confocal, so you're not going to use that. But this can be a nice quick way to move between different filters rather than going through the software as well. All right, and you have a shutter control for the transmitted light here also. You can turn on and off. All right. Load position can be quite nice as well. What load position does is it basically lowers the objective a few millimeters so that you can change samples without running the risk of hitting your objective. So if you hit load position, then you'll see that it gives you an interface that tells you that it's dropped down a little bit. There's a few different controls here. And the one that really matters is this arrow with the line over it. So this is the one that will get you back to your original working position. If you do anything else, then these are really just focus controls. So these would just literally focus up and down. And then the set work position would actually turn the lower position into your new work position. So if you wanted to start from scratch and just focus up by hand, that's what you would hit. But if you want to go back to what you had before, you're just going to hit this arrow with the line on it. All right. There are controls for definite focus here as well. But again, this is something that you're usually going to integrate into your experiment. And so we can control that better through the software. Same thing goes for things like incubation. We can click on the incubation here and we can work with each of these individual components, but it's much easier just to do this through the software. So that's what we're going to do. All right. Everything else is really through the software. And so that's where, that's where we're basically going to spend a lot more of our time for pretty much the rest of everything, I would say. The only other thing that we haven't talked about, because I generally leave it until the end, is startup and shutdown. So you'll notice that the system has these very informative yellow pieces of tape over everything. Was this you or was this one? Okay, yeah. Maybe Brandon, I don't know. But very helpful. So basically, these are things that you do not need to worry about turning on. They are connected to the rest of the power strip, and so they'll turn on as you start the microscope. All you really need to do is turn on this one component switch right here. And and it's just one switch now. So for everyone who got used to doing 3 when you're working with the 880 or an older confocal from us, we've made it easier. And if the computer isn't on, you would also turn the computer on, and that's basically it. In terms of warm-up time, I would probably take this back.
Sure. Yeah.
So in terms of warm-up time, the LEDs don't really need a lot. I mean, I would still basically start start the system before you start getting your samples ready. So you give them, 20 minutes, half an hour or something like that to warm up. But otherwise, there's not a lot that you really need to worry about. In terms of cool down, there's no wait period. So no 5 minutes waiting for your argon laser. Everything is LED except for that halogen lamp for transmitted. So the solar light engine is LED. The lasers are all diode, so they don't pump out a lot of heat, and you don't have to wait for them to shut them down. So very, very handy to work with, very long lifetime, very stable. Hopefully you get a lot of good use out of them. And I think that's kind of it for hardware, actually.
Okay.
How are we for time on this thing? Oh, wait, actually, I know what we can do. If you don't mind holding that, I'm gonna change out the stage here. So for the morning, I just have a microscope slide that we can work with. And so one of the things to notice is that we do have a stage insert in here that is built for multi-well trays. So you've got this little spring clip here. You can drop in any kind of multi-well tray. I'll try to clean up some of the oil on it if I can. And really, I want to be able to convert that out for this stage insert right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with these 4 screws that you see on the, or maybe even from the top potentially.
So that screw, that one.
Yeah. And actually, what I'm going to do, because I usually do this during the install, but I'm actually going to put electrical tape over these ones so that they're not even an option. You won't even notice them at that point. Okay. So I'm just going to work with this screwdriver right here and pop out these different stage insert screws. That's on way too tight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hand tight, guys. Hand tight.
Hand tight. I'm also going to leave you a couple of shorter screws as well, just in case those help. Because what you don't want to do is if these screws dig down too far, you can actually push them into the bottom of the piezo. And if that happens, I think the speaker's over there. I should be talking that way. And if that happens, then you're not actually getting Z-piezo movements anymore because it physically can't move at that point. Never mind the fact that it's not healthy for it either. So I'm going to take this out. We do on this have a few different of these little leveling worm screws. Some of them are actually down quite far, and I think that's the reason why people maybe need to try to compensate by screwing these in a bit. So I'd actually recommend just removing these, honestly, because the plate is flat enough without them.
Yeah.
So let's maybe take those out today, because some of these are quite low, actually. All right, and let's see what we've got here. So not terrible. You can see underneath this, if you kind of poke the phone in here, that this is sort of the original stage underneath the piezo. So we still have our old-fashioned stage with that little red dot and the little spring clip and everything, but then sitting on top of it is this piezo Z stage. So for X and Y control, we're still using the old-fashioned XY stage, and then the piezo again is just right on top. This piezo, I should mention, has a travel range of about 500 microns. So for anyone who's working with anything that's thicker, then Zen will just automatically kick over to doing the objective focus, which obviously is still part of the system. But just to know that for really thick samples, Z-piezo is not going to be an option, and honestly, it would be hard to get it to work anyway. So what I'm going to do, if you want to maybe point over here, is I'm going to take these screws from the one insert, and I'm going to just place them into the one that I want to use. And there are a few backup screws, and actually, like I said, I'll leave you a couple more behind as well. but you really just want to transfer these over. And it's worth mentioning that they're not captive, obviously, because I just moved them. So don't just, one of the things that I used to do for training would be just to flip this over to show you it, and then you go chasing all of your screws. So just be careful with that. All right, so we have the screws on here. Again, some of these are a little bit low, so what's that?
I don't think you ever pulling an Allen key.
Yeah, I have some in my,
Yeah. I think it's a-
yeah, I know where they are. I have some as well, but for the moment, they're not that bad actually. So I might just throw it on just to
Okay.
work with for the moment. All of this will be taken care of over lunch for sure. So we can just pop this in like so. And again, I want to make sure that I don't have anything sitting over the objectives here. So I'm just going to kind of move this so that the stage allows me to clear these rails from the objective itself. And I'm starting with the 10x. I could even start with the 5 if I wanted to. But basically, I'm just going to screw down each one of these. It's a good idea to kind of work across, honestly. So just do one at a time, like so. Finger tight is really all you need. So just kind of get it snug. Give it like the most gentle extra push. That's all you need. And same thing goes for this one, and we're all set. All right. So at this point, I can load my sample. You can see we just have the ever-present convallaria water lily slide and cover slip down for this inverted microscope. Let's maybe slide that a bit bigger like so. And ta-da. And if I want to, I can clamp down these pins. I haven't been on this microscope in a while, and I don't know where the focus is. So one of the things that I'm going to do actually, just to make sure that even if I do lift up a little bit, I don't end up damaging the slide. Then the slide is going to break first. Your sample is the first thing to go. But you want to make sure that you don't damage the objective and that you don't get glass everywhere. So I'm actually going to, even though I'm locking down this side, I'm kind of leaving this side a little bit loose so that if I do end up focusing too high, I have a little bit of room to breathe here. Once I know that everything is focusing good, I can always kind of bring this in and clamp it down so that it doesn't move. If I'm flying around fast and doing tiling and multi-position and stuff, but for the moment, I want that breathing room. Okay. All right. So if we really mean business, we close everything down like so. I'm just going to keep these open for the moment because it's be easier to work with. And I think that we are getting pretty close to the end of everything that I wanted to talk about for hardware. Has everyone been able to hear this okay? Because we keep on kind of facing different directions. So has the sound quality been all right?
Sound is good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions about hardware?
Yeah, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Let me pull those up here quickly then. Okay, oh yeah, good, great question. Can we use, okay, so should they wait for the login screen of the computer before turning on the components? No, you should be able to turn on the components and then the computer if you need to. That should be no problem. And in terms of turning on the computer, you should be able to turn it on while the touchscreen is still loading up. It doesn't hurt to wait for the touchscreen to finish loading before you start the computer though. Second thing is for incubation, how long does it typically take the hardware to equilibrate to 37? Great question. Yes, and you certainly do drift if you start imaging too soon. So this is an excellent question. If you're working with the heated enclosure, then that can take easily a couple of hours to warm up. And honestly, if you have something like 3 to 4 hours, that can be ideal. The heated stage insert heats up a lot quicker. So give it maybe half an hour if you're lucky. Then you should have no trouble with that system coming up to temperature. But And same thing goes for the water jacket around the humidifier bottle as well. So the heated enclosure, though, again, you want to really give it a fair amount of time before you warm it up. I used to be really lucky that I was doing experiments with mice, and so you turn the system on with incubation when you get in for the morning, do basically a 3-hour, 4-hour dissection, and then everything was perfectly ready by the time you get to the microscope. That being said, as soon as you bring your sample to the microscope, you're opening up the chamber, you're opening up the lid, you're getting everything set up. That can take a little time. So you want to be, even if you spend all of this time letting everything equilibrate, at least all of the metal is warmed up and equilibrated and everything, but you are going to lose some air as you do that. So there is a little bit of settling time, even if you've taken the time to warm everything up. So just bear that in mind. There are certainly focus strategies that can help you adjust for that, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt when you get to the microscope for the first thing that you do to basically, after equilibration is done, load your sample first and then take the time to set up your experiment and everything else. And during the time that you're setting up, things can kind of reestablish themselves again. Does that make sense? One other hardware thing, I think, now that I realize before we kind of move away from that topic, if you want to share your phone one last time, sorry, is this little humidifier bottle right here. And so I passed over this quickly, but for anyone who hasn't worked with these before, it's worth mentioning that you have a minimum and a maximum level here. So you really just fill this with distilled deionized water, 18 megaohm water or something like that. To be perfectly honest, the best water that you can get for this is from like the pharmacy or the grocery store, which is glass distilled water, those 4-liter jugs. Those generally don't have any kind of mineral accumulation over years. Okay, great. So there is one here that's basically meant for 30 degrees C. So this is Immersol 518F, but you'll notice that it has this little 30 degrees C designation on it. There's also one that's regular Immersol 518F, and it's something that you normally don't pay attention to, but it means that it has this 1.518 refractive index when you're imaging at 23 degrees Celsius. And then the third bottle that you have, which a lot of people working with Zeiss are probably familiar with, is this Immersol W. Okay, and this one has a little blue sticker on top. I might take a Sharpie and do a little big W on it. And so just to start here, this is one that you would only use for the water immersion objective. So that would be the 25x objective, okay? When you have that 25x set to water, and actually that's another thing I can show is the correction color, is you would use this. And when you are doing short-term experiments, there's no point in using this viscous oil-like substance, which basically has the refractive index of water. If you're doing short-term imaging, it's much faster, much easier to just use regular old-fashioned water. But for long-term experiments where you're running across hours or days, that'll evaporate before your image is finished collecting. And so that's where working with this oil can be quite helpful. All right. This 518F, honestly, I would just leave this in a drawer somewhere or put it with another microscope because you really don't need it here. The 30 degree oil that you have for the system when it's running up to temperature, when you have the lasers going and everything else, this is really kind of a better match for the space between the objective and the cover slip. And so I would generally use this for my oil immersion objectives all the time, believe it or not. And then I think there might be one for 37 as well. Yes, here we go. So inside the enclosure at the moment, there's also one that's here specifically for 37 degrees also. And so when you're running everything at full incubation, this is going to be a better refractive index match for those oil immersion objectives. Okay. Let's take a look at the 25x objective while we're here as well, and let's talk about that correction collar a little bit because I realize it's something that I often don't do. let's go to objectives. Let's go to 25x. And I am going to take this objective out just so that I can show you what's going on with this. So let's just move our slide out of the way. This is a very nice, robust, thick objective here. And you'll notice, and normally what you would do is set this correction color before you get started with an experiment. You shouldn't really need to unscrew it all the time, or maybe you want to do this for people. I don't know how you want to handle that. But let's take a look at the correction color here. And what you can see is that there is a little black mark on this collar that I can turn. And you can see that it basically starts with water. You can do silicone with this. You can do glycerol, which is even higher refractive index, and we can go all the way up to oil. All right. And for oil, you'll notice that the little cartoon basically has hatched lines going through two lines. For glycerol, for silicone, and for water, you have two different cartoons. One of them that just has a single line at the bottom, and one that has two lines at the bottom. So this one is meant for, with the single line, is meant for water without a cover slip. This is meant for water with a cover slip. And then, yeah, Germans, right? So this one here, this is silicone again without a cover slip, with a cover slip. Glycerol is without or with a cover slip. Oil doesn't really matter because the cover slip is the same thickness, which is why you only get one cartoon. Okay, so this is how you can set it. I mean, unless you tell me different, I often leave this just at water with a cover slip, but it's really up to you where you want to set that. Okay. If it's off, then your image is going to be dim and your image is always going to be blurry. So even though we have those cartoons on there, you can often at least get it close. And then you can always tune this a little bit by hand, even just keeping the objective right here, probably reaching in underneath from the side, like so. Yeah, it's going to be tough. And so you can really just turn this right there to really optimize the image clarity and the image focus and quality, because even the markings can be a little bit off.
So just like you can see it right there. So you can just reach your hand through. There's absolutely no need to take the objective off of the microscope.
Yeah.
Zero need.
And you can optimize it just by looking at the image quality, really, right? So the other thing I guess that we can show while we're down there is where we don't have DIC sliders. So let me try to reach in from here. So these DIC sliders would normally go under the objectives. And so you have these little placeholders here, these little dust covers that are sitting in place of it. But really, let me see if I can do this through your camera. It's going to be like remote operation. So normally you would have Wollaston prisms that go in here for DIC, but again, for AeroScan, but for AeroScan, we normally don't include those on the system. You have them in a box somewhere, but they're typically removed for normal operation. So if you're doing confocal, if you're doing spectral, you can keep those in place. But for AeroScan and multiplexing, you want to keep them out.
It's back there, yes.
Yeah, and just make sure. Just want to make sure that it's yeah, so that is your objectives, a little more detail. I guess one other thing to mention, which anyone who's worked with these systems before knows, since we're kind of pointing the camera at it, is there's a little chip right here. And that chip needs to be in contact with the tower on top to be able to do confocal imaging. So if you're ever in a situation where you can see things by eye and you switch over to confocal mode and you can't see anything, then there's a good chance that basically this tower isn't fully down in place. And again, if that contact isn't made, then the lasers will not work. So that is your laser safety device on this system as well. All right.
I have a question real quick.
Sure.
So I asked the chat, to what degree will the 37-degree oil make a difference in terms of imaging if it is not?
Let me see if I can start the video. There we go. What's that? Oh, so this will be, what is this one called here? This will be marine, oh, no. Who am I? Hold on.
That wasn't the same video.
Okay,
Or,
I just
sorry.
turned it on, so Zeiss, yeah. Thanks.
Yep.
There we go. All right. Okay, so just to show you the stage shelf incubation for the heated stage insert. So at the back of the space here, there's basically 3 different components. Right here, you can see the piezo insert. This goes in first, and then the 2 that I showed you down at the bottom here, there's a thick metal insert, which is the heated stage insert that sits inside of this, and then the lid that basically goes on top. So just to show you quickly how to set these things up. Like I said, the first thing that we're going to do is to take the heated stage insert, which you see right here. Typically, I will load it this way. And you would normally take the 4 screws, lay it down there as well. And then what you can see is there's a little spring clip right here that basically is going to allow us to put that heated stage insert in place. There's also a couple of little cutouts here. So you can notice maybe up against the white background, there's a couple of little cutouts like these. And then there's a little bit of space here as well for parts of the heated stage insert that's going to go in next. So if I move the lid out of the way, you can see this here. And actually, I'm going to flip this around to know what I think about it. So this is the heated stage insert, and this is sort of the classic one that we've had on all of these different systems before. You can see that there's a couple of little spring clips to lock down lids and things like that. You can see that there is a little brace that you can use to basically put in 35mm Petri dishes. So the overall space itself fits a 60mm dish. And if you have a 35mm dish, you can basically work with this. There is a screwdriver on the side of the microscope that you can use to basically work with these screws. And you would basically, I usually lay this down on the air table and press these brackets up against the Petri dish and then tighten the screws in place. And once you have that set up, you can basically just take this insert and press it against the spring clip that you can see under my finger on the other side. So you can press it against the spring clip, and then as you do that, the whole thing is just going to pop into place. Okay. That's that part. The rest of this has enough room when you press against this for chamber slides. And if you have longer slides, there's actually a little piece, this little red button block. You can just pull this out entirely, and that way you have a longer space for your slides and cover slips, and you would have like the label for the slide going here, and the rest of it basically over the opening that you see. All right. So in terms of popping this into place, let's pretend that we're doing a 35mm dish. So we'll pop this back in place also. Once we have that, you can also notice that on this, you have a couple of little push down pegs that would allow you to feed in tubing for perfusion. And so those are basically what line up with the cutouts that I showed you on the piezo insert as well. So if we don't have tubing, we leave those up so that everything is enclosed. And I'm basically just going to lay this down against the side that doesn't have the spring clip. And then I can push back on this little spring clip here to basically open up that corner and let everything drop down into place. And once I've done that, I can bring over the lid, place that down on top, and we're ready to go. That's all there is to it. As you're bringing the condenser down, just pay attention to the position of the condenser. If anybody has this set too low, it can end up tapping the plate, and over time, sooner or later, it's basically just going to pop out. So just be mindful of that. Yes. Obviously, you want to try to keep all of these cables away from where the tower's coming down, but otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward. So that's pretty much all there is to the heated stage insert. Right. So let's not destroy our slide. Let's go back here. Put this one back down in place, and we are ready to go. So once you get the hang of this, it'll really just take a minute or two to basically get it set up exactly the way that you want. It should be pretty straightforward with a little bit of practice. All right. The other thing I'll show you is that I did get a chance over the 10 minutes to basically put this little cover back on. So this is really the way that this should look. You've got these two screws that are holding this in place. And then this whole piece at the back is kind of hinged. And the point of this is that when you push this back, the whole thing just moves with it. So there's nothing you should need to do with the black cover. You basically just slide this back and forth. That's all it should take.